for me, trails are the longest standing imprint of human occupation of our planet. And if we can't figure out how to travel lightly on the land without destroying it, then that's the work to be done.
Hello, everyone. Today we have on a very special guest, Mr. Bob Wright. He is a landscape architect and an alum of the Harvard Graduate School of Design. We briefly met during a volunteer day at the Franconia Ridge Trail Loop restoration project, where Bob and his team led us through some trail maintenance and restoration work. And we met, and I thought he would be a really interesting guest to have on the podcast so that we could talk about his work and his perspective of the Appalachian Mountains, because he's from the Northeast, whereas I'm from the Southeast. So, Mr. White, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on and being on the podcast. My first question is, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the Boston area, in Winchester, and both of my parents were teachers, so we had every summer was off. I never spent a single summer in my family's home. We always rented it out to someone and basically packed up at the end of grade school or high school or whenever, and then came back on. Usually it was Labor Day afternoon, and we'd unpack our clothes and go to school on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I spent all of my summers, probably from being born up to probably when I was 17 or so, 17, um, uh, traveling and going to national parks around the country, and a lot of that was also spent up in Vermont, where my family had a summer camp that was part of an old farm from the 1800s. So I grew up basically as a country summer country boy, playing in the woods, swimming in rivers, hiking, and when I got a little older, rock climbing and doing things like that. By the time I was a senior in high school, I started working in the summer, and that was when I worked with the Appalachian Mountain Club Trail Crew. And so that was 5 summers, and then a couple other summers with the other mountain clubs. So anyway, so don't want to get ahead of myself here, but yeah, I grew up. I'm a Boston. Lots of Harvard people in my past. My father did a master's there. I had a grandfather who went there in World War One, and then left Harvard to go be a balloon pilot in World War One, and then came back for
Wow.
his degree. And so people that did interesting things.
Mhm. And after you graduated high school, you went to UMass Amherst to study environmental design. Was that with an intention to go and become a landscape architect, or did
Oh,
you have a different career path in mind?
I wish that it was that clear.
Yeah.
I originally thought I was going to be a wildlife biologist until I hit genetics,
Mm.
at which point my professor called me in and said, yeah, you might want to think about a different career, because if you don't get genetics, you're not going to be a biologist. And I came from a musical family, so I went back to my roots, and I was a music major for 3 years. And until I met a 16-year-old Wynton Marsalis at a master class, and I just saw where the trumpet player, professional trumpet players are going. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to do that either. But had a architecture professor. I started taking architecture courses at Smith College, which is part of the 5 colleges, and the architect professor there really took me under his wing and became a mentor. And that basically led me to the door of the GSD and some other schools for graduate school. And it was literally the night before the applications had to go in that I decided to check the box on landscape architecture as opposed to architecture. And it was a very close call.
What made you switch or
Uh,
decide that?
Architecture equaled physics equaled math equals Bob was going to have a terrible time, because I was I was not even though I had musicians in the family and musicians in math are supposed to get along really well, it didn't. I didn't arrive with those wires. Um, so whereas by then I had done my time on trail crew, and I said, landscape architecture equals I know how to make water run downhill, and I think I had sort of a primal like calling to the outdoors. That was a big part of my life. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so then there was the 3 years at the GSD, and that was a very eye-opening,
Yeah.
inspirational time. Um,
Mhm.
I think actually landscape architecture now is a lot more interesting than it was then. Uh, the environmental movement was kind of
Mhm.
getting well underway. When I
Mhm.
was in grad school, um, but now it's just such a deeper practice.
Yeah. And coming out of the graduate school of design, did you have a specific job lined up? Did you have internships? How does an early career in landscape architecture look?
hmm well, I was fortunate in my class because I had quite a lot of drawing experience from undergraduate school. And so I had quite a lot of experience. So I was able to, I landed jobs. I worked for the city of Cambridge Community Development Office for two of actually all 3 years of my at the GSD, and then I also ran the wood shop at the GSD and
Mm.
built exhibits. I built exhibits for famous architects and all the display boxes and frames and dioramas and all sorts of things. So I had a lot of sort of hands-on things. I sort of had my heart set. I got married after my second year at the GSD to a longtime companion, um, and we bought some land in Vermont and kind of thought that that's where we wanted to go. And so I landed a job in Vermont, um, that I had for 2 years with landscape architects, long enough to get my experience to get my license.
Mm.
And then I left there. There was a lot of like ski area condos and things like that. It wasn't actually stuff that I really liked all that much. And then I went to work for an architect for 5 years, in Woodstock, Vermont. And so I basically brought landscape architecture to that architecture practice. Then recession number one of my career took that
Mm.
down, and I ended up opening up my own office. I had my own office for 30 years
Wow.
in various forms. So I guess you could say I didn't follow a normal trajectory of being, working in big offices, working under I worked under people who were capable and creative and thoughtful, but I think I kind of figured out my own way for a lot of this.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely, that's the best way to do it. Do you have a few projects that you're particularly fond of when you had your own business?
um, Oddly enough, I mean, one of my most meaningful projects is in White River Junction. It was a veterans memorial,
Mm.
and in a park setting. And so I worked with a with a sculptor collaborator, and it was an interesting setting because it was right near the train station in White River Junction, which is the convergence of five different railroad lines. And for veterans, it was a place where basically where primarily young men from the hill towns would come to White River when they were going off to war. So I'm a pacifist. I'm a Quaker. So it was kind of interesting to do a veterans memorial, um,
Yeah,
for a pacifist.
that
Um,
is.
Although I can be an angry pacifist at times too. So so the metaphor was, everyone coming, and then it was at the convergence of the White River and the Connecticut River. So that is part of a whole flyway uh, for uh, for birds along that are migratory birds. So the memorial actually is five geese, and they're in this garden setting, and several are taking off and several are standing, and so it's five geese representative of the five branches of the military and Coast Guard. And so it's sort of a metaphor. The town manager he just gave me a whole bunch of money and just said, go do a memorial. And I was hoping you'd do something like out of stone and like weeping and crying. And I just was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something affirmative. And so it's been fun because that has been in place now for quite some time. And everybody always worried that, somebody would deface it or spray paint it orange or something like that. Well, it turns out that the local veterans community, including a couple, Vietnam era original Navy SEALs or frogmen, they basically
Mm.
put the word on the street that if you mess with our geese, we're going to mess with you.
Wow.
So there was definitely so they definitely took ownership of it, and we had a quite a fun evening chatting with the vets over at the VFW, drinking beer, and just like hearing their stories, particularly since most of them are from the White River or from the Hilltown areas, and they liked the metaphor. So, anyways, that was it's not really landscape architecture, but it's environmental art, and it's
Yeah.
art. It has metaphor, and I think that's if I have a thread in things of projects that are important for me, they're projects that tell a story, that have a story, and give an opportunity to share that story with other people as they come and experience the landscape, or they coming to a building, or they're coming to a museum, or things like that. I would say that my practice as landscape architecture has been somebody once said, one day you'll design a teacup and next day you'll design a regional plan. And maybe that is, a solid case of adult ADD, with diverse interests as I have had. But I have had a really diverse practice. I've designed bridges with structural engineers, buildings with architects, graphics with graphic designers, worked with historians, archaeologists, and then all the crafts people who are, whether it's stonework or woodwork or the building trades. So in that way, it's been a very satisfying experience to just experience all of that. Um, but I have to say, being a sole proprietor of a small office it's lonely.
Yeah.
And
I
it
can.
can be heartbreaking at times when you want to, when you constantly have to compete with larger firms that have a deep bench of experience, and you're trying to basically say, well, we're an office of 3 or 4 people, and we would like to compete with an office of 150 people.
Yeah.
Um, and although people have said I can be quite convincing, that's an uphill climb. So late in my practice, I actually merged our office with a large firm, and so I've been with them for the past 10 years.
Mm.
And as of now, I've finished that 10-year stint, and I'm kind of returning to my own private practice, as
Mm.
well as the work on trails.
No, congratulations. That's exciting. You mentioned you're a Quaker and how it has influenced some of your work, specifically with the Veterans Memorial. How has your Quaker identity influenced some of your other works?
Um, well, I entered a competition with some friends from some friends and colleagues in the GSD for the National Peace Garden back in
Hmm.
probably the early '90s. And we were honorable mentions on that. So that was super. That was a super representative thing.
Yeah.
I designed a retirement community in Hanover, New Hampshire, that was a Quaker organization.
Mm.
That was interesting, doing business with the Quakers.
Yeah. Well, why do you say that?
uh, well, they work by consensus, but then when it gets to be when they become developers, essentially real estate developers for retirement, huge retirement communities, it's very much, at least it was back on that it was very much like construction kind of boy, it was a boys network. There
Mm.
was, so that was interesting. I think mostly what I tried to indoctrinate in was the principle of making decisions by consensus and seeking consensus rather than votes.
Mm.
And most of my public projects, I seek the room to have to reach consensus, because that encourages people to compromise and have dialogue,
Yeah.
as opposed to like saying, oh, let's have vote for which one we like, which is a very clean and sort of, certainly a democratic way to go about it. But if the vote is 49 to 51, you know, that's barely a decision. That's
Yeah.
a room divided, and I don't really care for that. So I have guided some very challenging projects through a consensus project process, rather uh, than votes. But I did have one project. It was a project for the state of Vermont, and the last meeting of the group. Unfortunately, I came down with the flu and I wasn't there. And another person on the committee basically said, "Well, let's take a vote on what we want to do." And
Mm.
it was 10 to 12, and the room was divided. And they said, "Oh, we got to get this over. We need to bring this to closure." Well, the divided vote ended up in 3 years of contentious minority reports, and it just turned into just a mess.
Yeah.
And I wish I hadn't had the flu that day. I would not have allowed that to happen. That being said, I can be a benevolent dictator too. My office used to say, "Yeah, Bob loves consensus it's as long as everybody gets along with him."
Yeah.
So, but it has been. Although I'm not a widely practicing Quaker at this time in my life, but at the time when that was all happening, it was important. It
Yeah.
still is. It still is.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah.
You mentioned some of your current work, that's moving back into the landscape architecture area in terms of trail maintenance or trail work or trail design.
Mm,
And when we met at the Franconia Ridge Trail Loop, you and your team, I believe you and some other volunteers with the AMC uh, guided us through working on, I want to say, a segment of a few hundred feet on the
yeah.
trail where
Right.
we basically just made a path that
We
didn't
made a
exist
trail.
before.
We made a trail
Yeah.
from the forest. Yes.
It,
Yes.
it was great. And you were very intentional and with the design and how wide the trail was, the slope of the banks, how we were packing the dirt and removing rocks and trail
Hmm.
roots. Can you talk a little bit about how you learned that art? Because I believe it's definitely an art rather than a science. It's something that
It,
you have an
it
eye
has
for.
both. It has both. I mean, when I worked on AMC Trail Crew, we didn't carry tape measures. We didn't carry levels into the woods. We worked with what nature gave us, and that was sort of an organic way of trail building. And there wasn't really, and I mean, I basically worked on the entire length of the Appalachian Trail, basically I'm going to say from Mount Moosilauke to well into Maine, over 5 summers. And it's probably 80 miles of trails of all the different segments. Franconia was a big one for me. I had 12 weeks. I just basically lived on Franconia for 12 weeks one summer. And it's the only summer I've ever gotten a tan. But so in the old days, it was basically sort of an organic use, using stone as it is. What we sought on Franconia was to, um, there are several things that we were really after. Is the parts of the existing trail were just damaged beyond repair, and they were so steep that we couldn't really. And yeah, I guess you sort of saw part of that
Yeah.
when we went up. And so we made a strategic decisions on planning for that, where we took the sections of the existing trail that we knew we could rehabilitate it, and basically make it so that it had more capacity, since we had 1,500 people coming hiking it every day, and in big crowds, and 40 or 50. It's now heading up to 50,000 people a year going across the ridge, and that's just in the summer season. There could be 100 or 150,000 people using that trail, 12 months of the year. It gets so much use. So we knew that we were going to basically try to build a trail that was more forgiving for people, because 80 or 90% of the people that hike Franconia Ridge have very little hiking experience. and so they're getting hurt. And that's at enormous cost for mountain rescue to bring, carry people 2 miles or 3 miles off the top
Yeah.
of the mountain to bring them down. It's just a huge burden on the community and safety issues for people. People were getting killed up there. And it wasn't just the weather. It was, the terrible condition of ledges, slippery ledges and things where the trail. So we made a decision as a part of the whole partnership of National Forests, New Hampshire State Parks, Appalachian Mountain Club, our organization, the World Trails Network, to basically look at strategic repair and rehabilitation of the existing trail. And then where we needed to really just start fresh is that we would design relocations of the trail. So that's what you worked on, was the third relocation. We finished the second relocation a couple weeks after you finished, and opened that up. I think we maybe have walked down it, or you may have seen
I
it.
think so. Yeah.
Um, so what happened? So what we found was the the second relocation that we did this summer it's about 800 feet long. So we had 6 of us on that for the summer. Um, but we knew that part was going to be fairly intense stonework because we had a lot of elevation change to capture. But if we had repaired the existing trail for roughly a similar length, we would have needed almost 400 rock steps for
Wow.
that section. And when we did the relocation, following the contours and doing stonework where we strategically needed it, but basically stretching it out to follow the contours rather than forcing our way straight up the mountain. So we calibrate the slope of the trail using measuring devices, levels, and to determine how steep we're going to build the trail. And we determined sort of a maximum steepness that we wanted. So when you folks were working, we were right at a threshold of a 15% slope, which is 15 feet and 100 feet,
Mhm.
which is, it's an uphill incline. It's sort of a ramp-like feeling. It's a little steeper than a handicap ramp, but not
Mhm.
too far off of that. Um, and so, yeah, basically you sort of strike a line across the contours, and then you excavate out to follow that. And so all the pieces of how much you dig, and then how much where the dirt that you're digging out goes, trying to use that as to its best advantage. And digging down, there's soil science, there's engineering, there's measurements, there's physical strength of, moving, big rocks and things that may be in the way or may be
Yeah.
used for other stuff. So it's a whole, it's sort of it's a full immersion, but it is more of a measured and calculated process now. So when we plan a relocation, we go through that process of locating the route through the forest, and we measure the grades even with the existing mountainside or hillside that you're working on. And then we plan ahead. We know, like this summer, we know that the segment that you worked on from there to the top of that next relocation, which will be about 1,600 feet this summer,
Mm.
is that we will build 150 rock steps.
Wow.
We know that, with plus or minus 10%, we have a margin of error or accommodation that we have. So we plan it all ahead. Not everybody does that. Some trail builders, they build. They just go and build, and they don't really like planning, and they don't really like talking about it, except they love to argue about it.
Yeah.
That's when I just was like, you could figure this out before you have 20 people standing here with tools in hand while you guys are figuring this out on the fly,
Yeah.
rather than being prepared. So I have so my work for the Franconia project was to basically, I brought a proposal to the state of New Hampshire. I had a private funder for $500,000 for a 4 or 5 year effort. Uh, and basically said, we will design the trail, we'll build the trail, we'll give it back to you better than any other trail, probably better than any other trail in the White Mountains, and you will have a maintainable trail that's safe and it will be good for mountain rescue and good for the environment. And and I'm standing in the governor's office, and he says, "What do I need to do?" And I said, "Can you pronounce the letters YES?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you. That's all I needed."
Great.
So that was kind of funny. That was fun. With
Yeah,
he was extremely supportive. The state has been extremely supportive, and
that's awesome.
they'd like to export our model to other locations for other trails that have similar challenges. They've
Mhm.
done some of it. They like that we've done a lot with volunteers. We've had, uh, as of the end of this year, we've had a total, including you guys and gals, we've had 350 volunteers
Wow,
come
that's
for, and
awesome.
some have come for like 20 days.
Mm.
People have come just like dedicated, many Saturdays to us to
Mm.
come and do the work.
Yeah.
So it's a unique model of combining private funding, professional trail builders to do the craftsmanship, and then volunteers, which has really created quite a vibrant community of folks that are pretty dedicated to the bridle path.
Mhm.
We're going
Yeah,
to have to find
definitely.
something else for them to do after we finish the bridle path this summer.
Yeah. More projects sounds great.
We do have other projects. Yes, we have some fun things coming up that will be really fantastic.
Anything you can talk about?
Well, we're going to go finish. We're going to go over to the Falling Waters, which is the other
Mm.
part of Franconia, and
Mhm.
we've got a grant. We just got a grant for that, so we're planning that for 2027.
Mm.
And in the spring, we're going to use Artist Bluff in Franconia Notch, it's a little rocky knoll at the northern end of the notch, and it was actually the in the 1800s. It was the location of the for the White Mountain School of Painters,
Mm.
the first classically trained, like European trained fine art painters came to the White Mountains and painted Franconia and other parts of the White Mountains. So they took their easels or their sketch pads up onto Artist Bluff and painted from there. So the
Mm.
trail up to it is terrible. It's straight up the mountain, and it gets well, I went up in October on a peak foliage weekend, and I had to, you know, scramble by 3,000 people who were trying to get up to the top, and there it's all crowded. So we're going to teach a course in trail design for professional trail builders and land managers, and use that as a case study area and lay out um, a different trail to the top.
Mm.
And we actually think, given the elevation at the top at the ledges and the elevation of where we start, that we is actually a 5% grade. We could actually, hypothetically, notwithstanding that there's some 50-foot cliffs in there, just to get around, is we could hypothetically build a handicapped accessible trail up
Wow.
there. Should be a spectacular. It would be a one of a kind
Mhm.
experience for folks in a wheelchair to get up to, in about a half a mile, to get up to a really beautiful overlook.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's we're going to be advertising that nationally, and attracting a crowd of 25 or 30 people for the class, and for 4 days we'll be up there
Mm.
doing that class. I'm very excited about it. We're going to really advance the state of the art of trail design and really let people go through the process, because most land managers are like, well, if the trail's terrible, let's just go fix it. Well, it doesn't really work that way anymore, and
Yeah.
that's an administrative, sort of a bureaucratic solution,
Mhm.
when they don't really have time or necessarily the expertise to really consider what the options are.
Yeah. When we were working on the part that my group and I were working on, you mentioned that that specific design of the trail was a bit unique. I believe you mentioned specifically its width and the way that
Mhm.
you had the stone steps every few feet in more of the steeper sections that were incredibly wide and that were custom made
Yeah.
from different kinds of stone. Can you talk a little bit about the that sort of design and your intentions there?
Well, when the slope of the trail goes over 15%, we then transition to using stone stairs. And stone stairs, and what we wanted to do was to have a nice even flow of the stairs rather than just sort of arranging, the organic trail would just arrange stones and sort of place them, sort of naturally, but not really, I guess I'll call it architecturally. Um, what we wanted to do is to really have a nice orderly flow of the stairs. And so the majority of the stonework that we're doing involves, finding a source of stone, a lot of stone. I mean, we moved almost 70 tons of stone this summer, uh, split with drills and wedges, and then we transported the stone. You didn't see this; it wasn't set up at the point when you came, but basically we split it off the mountainside as in a location where we can get a lot of stone out of a limited area, and then we set up what's called a high line or a zip line, and then you suspend the stone on a pulley and you zip line it down the side of the mountain. So you might see 1,000-pound stone the size of the front of your car, 20 feet in the air, going, traveling 300 feet from where the stone was sourced to where it is going to go to be placed. So the process, and this is um, the process of the stone sort of sourcing. So all the stone comes from the mountain, and so you're dealt with whatever geology of natural stone features you have, and it's remarkably diverse. In some places, you can have stone that literally you can go through with a hammer and a wedge or something like that, and split it into like nice flat sort of pancake-like pieces. And then in other cases, you have to literally, drill hundreds of drill holes and wedges and split it to capture the split with the grain of the stone. Stone has different directions of grain. Sedimentary stone tends to have been accumulated in layers, and so it makes sheets of stone, kind of like slate. Granite is a very universal stone, as grain and in universal grain, so you can split it in at least 2 or 3 different directions. And as long as you get a nice line of your drill holes and your wedges, it will fracture at those points. And then there's some stone called like basalt, which is more of a volcanic stone. Doesn't have a lot of grain. In fact, it sometimes wants to go and split on a spiral and just go the complete opposite direction of what you want to do. And it's agonizing. And that stone is really, really hard. So you're burning up your drill, you're using up your gas, your generator or your batteries or whatever you're doing for your power drill. So anyways, so the process of harvesting the stone, traveling the stone to the work area, uh, to source it, and then the placing of the stone. And we basically set up a standard, and this was agreed with the other partners on the Ridge project, is the standard we would have, basically a 7 to 9 inch vertical step and roughly a 15-inch tread for the step surface. And so that height to width, that can actually take you up a 35% slope.
Wow.
If you just do the math on it, 7 inches, 14 inches, that can take you up a fairly steep, so we're going over 15% on the ground. And so then you're steeper, then you just array the stone. And so when we lay out a stone staircase, we take the bottom elevation and we set a stone flush in the ground right there. It's called a base stone. And then we build up from there and space them out on that sort of spacing pattern. But the other part of the work with the stone, with the steps, is that in the old days, we used to do what's called a water bar. Basically, it would be a log.
Yeah.
You dig a ditch in the trail that would divert the water in the side, and you would reinforce it with a log or with stones. And they just end up filling up with silt, and they're very, they take a lot of work to maintain. It's, you have to clean them out every couple of weeks over in the course of the summer. So what we did instead was, it's actually a technique borrowed from mountain biking, where you build your stone, or you have a grade. It's called a grade reversal. So you build the stone step, so you're one stone higher than the grade, and then you slope backwards and sort of push the water off to the side of the trail, allow the water to divert off the side of the trail, um, such that it drains before it washes over the stone staircase. So you avoid a situation of the erosion of the trail flowing down the trail and washing out, eroding out the work.
Mhm.
And so that is a very new innovation for a trail design in the White Mountains. There are many traditionalists that are like, oh yeah, we got to do the water bar, and hundreds of hours are spent, thousands of hours are spent
Yeah.
then maintaining them, when we could really just do a grade reversal and have the water flow off more naturally. And it's always fun to like build a piece of trail and then have a huge thunderstorm in the afternoon.
Mm.
And you get your rain gear on, then you just walk around, and then you just observe and see how the water is flowing. And we've really not lost on all the parts that we've built so far. And at this point we've had two or three hurricanes, several
Mm.
other massive storms that ruined other trails in the White Mountains, just washed out sometimes feet of soil,
Wow.
and we haven't lost anything. So we're pretty happy about this durability. It still takes maintenance.
Sure.
We have to clean out the grade reversals, but it's like wiping your kitchen counter as opposed to like digging ditches and
Mhm.
it's a different kind of a different kind of maintenance.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really enjoyed volunteering that day, and I know I learned a lot,
Better watch
and I
out.
think
We're
so
going to
too.
sign you up this summer.
Yeah, for sure. But before we had left, you and I talked a little bit about Appalachia versus Appalachia,
Oh boy.
and I'm on the Appalachia side of things, and I guess you're on the
Yeah.
Appalachia side of things. Here to discuss that?
Uh, I think that's I think it's a regional.
Okay.
I think it's a regional. I think it's regional language. It's. I think it's. I think it's vernacular.
Okay.
It's whether it's Harvard or Harvard
Yeah.
or Harvard. It's. I think it's just the result. Um, I like the way you pronounce it, but I
Mhm.
can never get it out of my mouth like that.
Okay. I understand. It's funny, when I came home a couple of weeks ago, I told some of my friends about you and the work that we did, and I mentioned the Appalachia thing, and all their reactions were like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
So it's funny, and I'm sure if I would say Appalachia in the Northeast, people would be like, "What are you talking
Where are
about?"
you from? Where are you from? Tennessee?
Uh, Southwest Virginia.
Yeah, Southwest. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
near the Tennessee border, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. A
But
beautiful part of the country.
Oh, I agree for sure. I love
Yeah.
it here. Well, as we're wrapping up, I do have two quick questions that I would like to ask. The first one is, what advice would you have to someone my age who is looking to pursue a career in landscape architecture or
Hmm.
in architecture generally, doing something that you do?
Yeah. Well, in order to practice as a landscape architect, you need to, and call yourself that. It's actually a legally defined title. And most professionals eventually have a license to practice in I think every state of the country has a license,
Hmm.
a licensing part. So it's kind of like passing your MD. I mean, it's a professional certification that requires a combination of education and experience, in the early part of your career. Um, and there are accredited programs in landscape architecture that are accredited by the American Society for Landscape Architects. Those are academic credentials, and each school, the GSD is the oldest one in the country. That was started by Frederick Law Olmsted. Used to be in the basement of one of the buildings right over near the Fog Museum. Can't remember which one, the name of it. Anyways, it was before the new, before the
The new building.
the modern building that the Gund Hall. So, but there's lots of other programs all over the country. They're great programs. You know, they're basically geographically distributed all around the country. You know, many states have at either a state university or a private university have programs, and you know, each of the programs, you know, historically have had different strengths and interests. I think everybody is really with the you know the sort of uh, uh, the interest and dedication to stewardship of the landscape and in light of climate change, in light of resilience, in light of equity, uh, you know, social equity. Um, I think there's just an interest in having that be a part of everything. Over my career, I have seen an evolution of that come through, and it's. I think it's finally matured. It's nicely matured now that landscape architects can really be, you know, as the people that really understand the landscape, understand the spaces between buildings, understand the patterns of communities or the patterns of nature, or the opportunity for damaged landscapes to be, you know, to be restored. Um, there are, you know, just there's a wide variety. The portfolio of what you can do as a landscape architect now, even from the when I graduated in '84, is significantly more diverse, more interesting um, than it's really ever been. So yeah, so yeah, I mean, basically the path you can either do an undergraduate degree. If you're just going straight into undergraduate school, but if you're, you know, if you're completing a bachelor's degree, you know, for an undergraduate degree, and you want to go on to landscape architecture, it involves, you know, going to a graduate school. If you have enough experience with some of the basics of you know, like some of the softwares, things like that, that's pretty much the, you know, that's the key to uh, you know, landing a job opportunity with a landscape architecture firm. You know, so learning, you know, the various computer graphics and all of that. Um, so that's, you know, that's an important part of, you know, basically giving you the key
Yeah.
to get in the door, and that's all taught. Personally, I think that there's a lot of energy put into that, and everybody is building graphics that look so hyper realistic. It looks like it's all built. I think it personally, and I'm a bit old school, so I don't do CAD. I have
Mm,
always had, you know, super capable staff, and I can sit by them, and we will collaborate on how things will come together. And I know all the commands. It's just that you don't want me to manage the file. It's kind of like me in math. Um, so, but I think that I think you also need to cultivate an artist's eye, and part of that is, you know, like part of my artist's eye is in the woods for the trail projects. And you know, one thing that I think that what I should say is the thing for me about trails is, uh, for me, trails are the longest standing imprint of human occupation of our planet. And if we can't figure out how to travel lightly on the land without destroying it, then that's the work to be done. You know, I'm not going to criticize us, but although we have not done a particularly good job, you know, but trails equals, you know, over the course of history, you know, there were trails, and then there were, you know, like cart roads, and then there were regular roads, and then there were railroads, and then there were, you know, public transport. You know, they are all a part of a hierarchy of how people move through the landscape, and we just, you know, I just see it as our oldest tradition of passage through the landscape. And so what a place, you know, it's like,
yeah.
it's perfect. And that's the metaphor. So anyways, back to school. I mean, I think try, you know, going and visiting different graduate schools to see, you know, what their programs are all about, seeing who the leading teachers are, how available they are to actually be your mentor and teacher. some places, and Harvard is included in this. They have guest professors come in from around the world, and they come in, but you don't really get very much time with them. You get a couple weeks at the beginning, a couple weeks at the middle, and a couple weeks at the end. You don't have this sort of regular mentorship,
Mhm.
as opposed to other people who are truly dedicated to the teaching
Yeah.
part of this of mentorship. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Great. And my last question, it could be considered a little bit of a cliche, but that is, what is the meaning of life to you?
um, for me, uh, I would say, um, I am called to do things that I know if that I'm pretty sure, like the trail stuff. If I hadn't stepped forward on that, it would not have happened.
Mm,
It just would the partnership wouldn't have happened. Just a lot of things. And so when I look back, if I think about like what I would want people to remember about my what I dedicated myself to in life, which was to do things that were out of the ordinary,
mm,
that were special, and that needed the passion and dedication, and to some degree, although many things that I've done have learned on the fly. You know, um, that if you're not learning something, then you're not really exercising your full potential as a human being to be creative and to do good work.
mhm.
So I guess I guess it would be to do good work and to do things that are truly unique.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. White, for giving me your time
Thank,
today and for all the work you do on the Franconia Loop and beyond. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Ethan. It's lovely to chat with you.